Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for joining Romy and I this evening. As you know, we're going to be discussing her experience of living with Pandas. Now, before I pass you over to Romy, I just thought I'd tell you a little bit about myself and also tell you why I'm running events such as tonight. So my background is that I am the CEO of TikTok Therapy. I am also the TIC therapist for the Children's E-Hospital. Now, although my main job is working with tics, I obviously get to experience the full elements and symptoms linked to conditions such as Tourette syndrome, tic disorders, and Pandas. Now, one of the most common questions I am asked is, what does the future hold for my child? Now, as much as I would love to have a crystal ball and would be able to answer that question, there isn't a clear pathway for children with these conditions. So I can't answer. However, we can really learn what the future could look like by hearing personal stories such as individuals like Romy. So I'm going to pass you over and let her introduce herself, and then I'm going to ask her some questions moving forward. Okay, over to you.
Hi, I'm Romy. I am 17 years old and I have Pandas/PANS, and I'm also diagnosed with Tourette syndrome, OCD, and Autism Spectrum Disorder. Ooh.
Brilliant. Okay, so I've got a series of questions and I'm going to put to Romy. We have discussed the questions previously, just so she's obviously got some answers for each one, and I really think they're going to be helpful for many of you. So the first question is, when did you first suspect Pandas?
Well, at my onset at age 8, it was very sudden. Tics, OCD, rages, lots of stuff, and my parents were doing a lot of research online, watching YouTube videos, reading books, trying to figure out what's happened, and they did hear about Pandas and PANS back then. And then at the age of 10, I had a blood test to see if they could check for strep, but it came back negative. So apparently there wasn't any strep there. But we are aware that just before the sudden onset, I did actually have a strep infection. So it may have either cleared up by then or come back negative. But we have suspected Pandas since the start, and it was just this March it exploded again after having a throat infection and eyelid infection. And as soon as all the severe symptoms started, including OCD, my parents were like, this has to be Pandas.
Absolutely. Okay, great. And what happened in your most recent flare?
In my most recent flare, I developed morality OCD, where I became obsessed with gratitude. I was like, I have to be grateful, and was like listing what I was grateful for in my mind over and over again. And then I had my intrusive thoughts were virtually constant, so I would have to affirm over them because it was like pure O. So I would have intrusive thoughts and then I'd have to think the opposite in my mind. That was going on so much that I couldn't really focus on what was going on around me. So I couldn't really watch TV or type or anything because there was no focus there. And the anxiety built up to such an extent that it was just pure intense fear, because I couldn't stop these thoughts and stuff. And I seemed to have a complete loss of control over my thoughts in general and not just those. And then I also had very strange intrusive thoughts, and then it started sounding like there was somebody else in my mind as well. So the OCD aspect was very strange. But then I did also have ADHD symptoms where I was moving constantly. I couldn't stay still or really focus on anything. And because usually I'm quite relaxed and stuff, but I suddenly was like almost quite impulsive as well. And I ended up having depressive episodes where I would feel incredibly shameful and for no reason and have no interest in anything. And that was very different to, my normal state, because I'm usually quite optimistic. So that was very, very sudden. And I then developed a loss of motor coordination. So I would go and try to touch my nose and I wouldn't be able to do it, and everything just felt heavy and I could no longer coordinate myself. And then I actually lost sensation here, and then my whole body sensation pretty much went, which was very, very bizarre. And then the tics returned because prior to that, I didn't really tic much for about a year, as I was managing it through diet and stuff. But with this infection, the tics didn't actually start straight away, but it was, I think, maybe like a week into the severe OCD and stuff, the tics just suddenly came back again.
Okay, yeah, it's quite cool. Okay. What treatment helped with this flare?
Well, in this flare, it was very severe, and at first we didn't really know what to do, but I ended up developing an ankle infection, and that required penicillin. And the penicillin did actually really help with the other symptoms, also brain fog. I had really severe brain fog where I kind of felt like I was in a cloud, but I couldn't really focus on anything. And that's one of the first things that seemed to clear up with the penicillin. Sensory processing issues as well. I had very strange visual processing where I'd be looking at something, trying to read it, and could not process or take anything in. So I think penicillin did really help with the way I processed things, and it also really reduced the OCD, because at the beginning it was constant intrusive thoughts and very terrifying, but the penicillin seemed to bring that down as well. And I also had very weird sleep issues where I could only sleep 3 hours at a time, and I heard my thoughts arguing in my sleep with like night terrors. So, and I couldn't really get to sleep until about 5 a.m. like most nights. So thankfully the penicillin did decrease the sleep issues. And I did also have an antibiotic eye drop because I had an eye infection, and that may have also helped a bit. But the only things that remained really were the tics and ADHD-like symptoms. So thankfully it did decrease the OCD, I would say, by about, well, over 90%, which I'm incredibly grateful for. And
yeah, like they're really problematic.
Yeah.
Okay. And what would you like everyone to know about Pandas?
Well, first of all, that it's real. I know a lot of people, I know a lot of people say, oh, it's controversial, but I don't think it's any coincidence that people do suddenly change and they become very, very different, and they go into remission when the right treatment is given and when the root is found. So it definitely is real, and that's so important to know, because if we lived in a world where, psychiatrists, psychologists, neurologists, pediatricians were all aware of this condition, then people would have such an easier life, because they'd be like, oh, this is what it is, let's treat it, rather than I've heard of people like suffering for years not knowing what's going on. So just that it's real and it's not actually controversial, and it's just so important that people know about it, and also that it's not something that you can, like, it's not behavioral. I know sometimes like the rages and stuff look behavioral, and I think it's important for people to know that this is the result of brain inflammation. It's not an individual doing that, and the change is just so abrupt.
Fantastic, brilliant, thank you. What impact has it had on your family?
Well, this flare, it was very hard for my family, because we obviously, you never expect it. We didn't expect that sort of thing to happen. And I remember my intrusive thoughts were so severe that I was like crying to my mum and saying I want to be put into a medically induced coma. So it was very severe. So my family, obviously, it kind of terrified them, because they had no idea what to do about it. So it can be incredibly stressful for the family. And when I was younger as well, it was stressful for them, because they were blamed for being bad parents or not disciplining me, and they just, they weren't listened to. And when I was younger, I was threatened to be put into a care home at the age of 12, because like the doctors had no idea like what was going on and stuff, and it's traumatic for the entire family to try and advocate and try and be listened to when the awareness isn't always out there.
Yeah, it's really, really common, sadly, that, you know, GPs haven't even heard of it, let alone know, you know, any information on it. Okay. How has the OCD affected you? Because I know from, you know, your previous videos that you've done on your personal site and things, OCD is a big part of this for you, isn't it? How is that affecting you?
Well, when I was younger, between the ages of 8 and 12 years old, I had Tourette OCD, so it is mainly sensation based. But that was overnight, sudden severe OCD rituals that took over 8 hours a day. I kind of lost the ability to do things because I would have to, like, dress myself. I would have to try and pull my clothes up and down over and over again. I would do that until I lost the ability to dress myself completely, and my parents had to dress me. I had bathroom rituals where I would be in the bathroom for hours, and I would wash my hands until they were like red and raw, and it would just take hours, and it would get to the point where it was about 3 a.m. and my dad would have to drag me out kicking and screaming because I was stuck in the cycle. And then I did actually, we did try to bypass the rituals, and I had to try and use public toilets instead of the home one because my rituals were always worse at home because that's the environment that they kind of interacted with. And then it affected everything. I couldn't even like walk across a room because I remember I had a ritual where I'd have to run across the room and jump over a certain area of the floor and stuff. So it was very severe, and it affected everything. Like when I was younger, I couldn't, well, I would leave my dinner to go cold and stuff, and I was late to school. So the OCD when I was younger did impact every aspect of my life. And then in this flare, because it was mainly pure O, so mainly mental, but I did have reassurance seeking. So I would research stuff on my phone, and then I'd keep doing it. My mum was like, I'm going to have to take your phone off you because I'd keep researching it. But then I keep asking her the questions, like, do I have this? Do I have this? And it was very repetitive. And then I also, one of the ones that wasn't mental, I would repeat the same phrase over and over again. It was really strange. It was, I think it was, I'm a lover, I'm a lover, I'm a lover, I'm a lover, really fast. But that was a compulsion rather than a tick. And then the pure robe was interesting because it was a lot of different sort of obsessions. I think it was something called Existential Ocd, where my mind would ask me questions and I would have to sort of ruminate to find an answer, and I couldn't find the answer, but that made me feel bad for not finding it. And then with the constant intrusive thoughts, they were basically saying things that I didn't want to happen or things I didn't agree with and stuff like that. And I would constantly have to affirm over it because I was absolutely terrified that they would come true. I was almost convinced, even though I knew it was still ridiculous, I was almost convinced by this. And I was also like really terrified that somehow it would seep into my subconscious and become who I am. So I was constantly just trying to go over it and over it and over it, but it wasn't really helping. But I couldn't really stop it at that point. I also had praying in my mind. Like if I thought bad thoughts, sometimes it's like I would pray in my mind to try and neutralize it. It also was, I guess, quite perfectionistic in a way, because it's like you can't do this. It was taking things that I couldn't control and saying you can't do that. So for example, with the insomnia, it was saying you have to go to bed by this time, and I couldn't, but my OCD was trying to keep me to a schedule that I couldn't keep. And then I had intrusive thoughts that were a bit like mental tics, but it ended up sounding like there was someone else in my mind yelling at me, saying some very, very horrible things. So I think the intrusive thoughts with the pure O and stuff were just really, really bad. And then with the morality stuff, as I said, it was the obsession with gratitude. I had to keep like listing what I was grateful for. And then I also had the obsession with being egocentric, which was quite an interesting one, because I would have to keep going in my head, I am equal to everybody else, and just keep doing that. And then also the obsession with like loving my friends and stuff, it'd be like, do you really love your friends? I'd have to write a list of like reasons why I'm friends with people and stuff. So it's like I couldn't focus on anything because my mind was just constantly filled with these things that was causing such intense fear that I couldn't control. And then also I had the emotional contamination part, and the emotional contamination part, it started off as I would have to feel like I'm suppressing an emotion within myself, but then it ended up labeling fear as a bad thing. But then I couldn't control feeling the fear, and then it made me feel really bad for feeling fear because it kind of convinced me that by feeling that emotion, I'm going to cause bad things to happen, which doesn't really make any sense. But OCD doesn't make any sense. So, like the intrusive thoughts, I also had like harm intrusive thoughts where I'd like think of like harming myself and stuff, even though I didn't want to act on it, and that's why it was like so terrifying because my mind was just completely out of my control at that point.
Okay. And do you think that your Tourette's or autism diagnosis is linked to your Pandas?
That's a really interesting question because with the autism, me and my family say yes, because with my autism, we think it might be a misdiagnosis because I saw an autism specialist at the age of 10 who said that she doesn't think I'm autistic. And then I saw, I had my autism assessment, it's about over a year long or something, but at the age of 12, they kind of, in my notes it said that I didn't meet the criteria in that assessment, but then they kind of phoned one day and said, we don't know if Romy's autistic, so we're going to diagnose her anyway. So that's kind of how I got the diagnosis of autism. They basically didn't know what it was, so they just said, it's autism. But with the Tourette's as well, that's quite interesting because I have been, like, obviously diagnosed with Tourette's for a while now. But my onset was, I think I had very subtle signs when I was younger, but my onset of the severe tics was overnight with the infection. And the fact that my tics returned again with an infection, it could be linked. But the diet does play a massive role for me, like it does with many people in the Tourette's community. Well, not everybody, but I have heard of a lot of other people in the Tourette's community who have been helped with diet and stuff. And but that turns out that can also be a case in PANS as well. Some people with PANS have food sensitivities as well. So I think that the Tourette's bit's really interesting because I'm not actually sure.
Yeah, I guess it's a golden question for many people because lots of people have a combination of diagnosis along with the Pandas. Okay, and how dramatic is the difference between being in a flare and not being in a flare?
I would say it's almost like a Jekyll and Hyde effect. Like when obviously when you're not in a flare, you can be your normal self and stuff, and then overnight you completely change. There are parents who don't really recognize their child. Like when I was younger, my mum would go into my bedroom and cry because she was pretty much mourning for the child she had lost for 4 years, because I couldn't do anything. And I think it is so important to understand that when parents go to the doctor and say, you know, their child changed, they need to be taken so seriously. You know, the doctor might not see what they were like before, but change is dramatic. So like the most optimistic person, most joyful person can have severe anxiety and depression almost overnight, and somebody who's usually, you know, quite easygoing might have intense rage, and it's a massive difference. And I think that's something that's really important for people to be aware of, that it's not something that just it's not usually gradual.
Yeah, absolutely. And why is it important that people are aware of Pandas, do you think?
Like, I think, as I said before, like with getting the correct treatment, because there are, I think there are many people out there with a variety of diagnoses who actually have PANS and Pandas, and it can actually be really confusing as well, because sometimes when people have a flare, the symptoms can change, and if somebody's already got some diagnosis but then they have another flare and get new symptoms, it can get really, really confusing, and then people end up with a multitude of different conditions that it said that they have, when it's actually Pandas and PANS, and the treatment, you know, can be quite simple sometimes, and all it takes is a doctor who understands, because there are people living for years, or even that, like, childhoods are stolen, but sometimes even people's lives, because if people don't identify it, then they may just live a life with these horrific psychiatric symptoms and neurological symptoms, and you know, they might haven't, people don't have a clue what to do about it if they don't know what it is.
Absolutely, absolutely. And is there anything else that you maybe thought, oh, I haven't said that, but would really like to share with the Pandas community?
I think it's just really important to trust yourself. Like, if you're a parent and you suspect pandas and pans, do what's best for your child, because so many doctors will say, no, it's not that. Like, my mum was actually told when I was 10 years old, just don't believe what you read on the internet. But I think you know your child best. If they changed suddenly and have a multitude of different symptoms that don't necessarily seem to fit in a specific criteria, just trust yourself and make sure that you keep advocating, because you can get what your child needs, and you know that can change their life for the better. And it is sad that, you know, someone's ignorance can prevent somebody from having a better quality of life.
Absolutely, that's fantastic. We've got some participants here. Anyone who's got any questions, if you would like to send them through to the chat now, and I'm sure Romy would love to answer them. If not, we will end here. And if you do have any questions afterwards, then send them through. And I'm sure, Romy, are you happy if I send any questions through to you? Are you happy to answer them?
Yes,
Awesome
definitely.
stuff. Okay, right, there's nothing coming through just yet. So on that note, we're going to say goodbye. If you have any further questions, like I say, please send an email through to cbit@ehospital.co.uk. Thank you again, Romy. It's been fantastic.
Thank you so much for having me on here.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.